sometimes newer employees are like nervous to ask for like vacation early on. I'm like, listen, you need to understand your value here and like what you are worth to this business. You are the people who run this business, and you should know that, and you should like think of yourself that way. Because if you do, you'll start to be more articulate about what is it that you want, which helps me understand how to help you. And then ultimately it makes everyone happier. People are really good at their strengths. They are likely going to figure out a way to succeed, regardless of their background, regardless of what you're interviewing them for. And nobody interviews that. Why? Because it means you have to come up with a different interview for everyone. But I think that's worth doing. I think it's worth considering, is understanding how can I adapt a screening process to find the best talent without having to just use like the same interview process that everyone else is using. What we should be evaluating is this person going to be successful in this role? Not does this person match what is typically thought of as an ideal data scientist?
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute workstation grade line of products and solutions. It's also brought to you by Aporia. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jack Blandin. So Jack is the first guest that I've had on that I've had the pleasure of working with in a true professional setting. Jack started as a software engineer, moved into data science at Trunk Club, has worked at Gohealth where I met him, as well as Wayfair and now Phi. He's the VP of data science where they're building smart dog collars. Jack has some pretty strong takes on how he believes the data science interview should be improved. We dive into those, as well as how he would build, as well as how he has built an effective data science team if he was starting from scratch. I really love this conversation with Jack. We get into some of our own roots, as well as some of the ways that he would like to change the field going forward. I had a great conversation with Jack, and I'm excited for the new chapter of his career and his life that's coming up, which we'll get more into in a little bit. Jack, welcome to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. I think you're the first guest that I've had that I've worked with in a professional setting. And nice. Hopefully you won't throw me under the bus too bad related to that.
We'll see.
Amazing. Well, so Jack, obviously worked together at Gohealth, where we were, sort of in, I guess they were like touching roles, where I was in product ownership. You were leading, I think it was machine learning engineering, if I remember correctly. I don't remember the exact specifics. It was something
I honestly don't remember the title either. Something like that.
Yeah. And from that experience, I always remember that you had such a unique way of viewing the world. I viewed you as like highly technical, but you also were one of the best people at asking questions that I'd met with. You were never afraid to be like, why do we do it this way? What is the purpose of this feature? And I know that's something that you've carried with you to that point, but also later in your career. I definitely want to dive into some of that and some of your philosophy, but I also want you to get familiarized with the guests. And we do that usually through a story. So the overarching first question that I like to ask is, how did you first get interested in data? Was it a pivotal moment, or was it more of a slow progression over time?
Really good question. And thanks for having me on, Ken. Really happy to be here. So yeah, the first time I remember being interested in data was back when it was called data mining. So this was like 2012, probably 2013. And I was a senior in college and I had a stats course. And I'm like, oh, I kind of like this, because I was a physics major and I loved, math and physics. But at the time I didn't want to do a PhD in physics, because that meant 6 more years of, math, doing random stuff. But I liked stats, and I thought data mining, what it was called at the time, sounded cool, where it was like finding hidden patterns in data. So at the time, again, this is 2013. At that time, there is no data science master's degree. Their data science is not even really a standard job. It's sort of just like an emerging term. But I still was interested in it. So what I was told by actually that professor or that course was, you should pursue a master's degree in computer science, because if you want to go into data science down the road, this will be very helpful for you, and it will help you like get into like that kind of a job. So I did that. I did a master's degree in software engineering. And I ended up just like really loving it. And I got a job doing that. I worked at a company called Trunk Club in Chicago. And that was like very pivotal for me as a career move, like a first major career move. And worked as a full stack software developer for a couple of years. Did pretty well there. But then, like we all do, all data scientists, at some point we're like, we get that itch again. And it's like, I love building things, but there's something missing here. And for me, it was that mathematical aspect to data science and machine learning or physics, where I love to build stuff, but I also love that intellectual stimulation from math. So at Trunk Club, we had just started a data science team. Like that was like, they literally sat right next to me. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something worth getting into again. So this was like 2016, 2017. I bought a book on Python and machine learning, read it. I was talking to my neighbor, his name was Scott Cronin. He was sitting next to me at the time, and just started getting into it again and realized this is like what I wanted to do. And so yeah, this is roughly 2017. I'm a software engineer, and we've got this new data science team of like 4 or 5 people. And, I go to our VP of engineering at the time, who managed both engineering and data science. And I was like, hey, can I switch? And he's like, no. And I'm like, why not? And he's like, well, because you don't have any experience doing this. And I'm like, but I want to, and I've been learning this, and I think I could be really good at it. So I was told no a bunch of times, but, after pushing hard enough for long enough and making it very clear that this is what I was going to do, eventually he gave in and gave me the option to do a 3-month intro program, I guess. But once I did that, it was pretty easy. It was just building stuff for the data science team. So sorry, kind of a long-winded answer there.
No, that was great. Something in that I thought was really interesting is you'd identified that there was something missing in the work you're doing. You sort of felt that itch. And I'm wondering how you went about identifying that, hey, what's missing is the mathematical element, or was that just completely intuitive? I mean, I think a lot of us feel like something's missing in our career, but we don't necessarily know how to go and identify what that is exactly. Maybe that's a broader metaphor for life, but what was your process for identifying and then essentially acting on that urge?
It's a good question. And I'll give you my answer, but I don't think this is like the end all be all. For me, I didn't even notice that there was something missing. But when I look back, what I noticed is that I started to do like a ton of side projects that were not related to my day-to-day job. A lot of them leveraged the skills that I was doing in my day-to-day job. But looking back, it was like pretty clear that I was no longer challenged. I was looking for something more, like looking to learn. And when, machine learning started picking up again, this was like 2016. So deep learning started becoming more popular. We started developing a data science team at Trunk Club. My roommate at the time was interested in it. So it was kind of just like showing up all around me. And then when I opened the book and took a peek at it, I remember the first big aha, oh, this is what I want to do, was really the first time I understood gradient descent. Was like, I get it. I get how this works. I get the math. I know calculus, and I can understand how you can algorithmically use calculus to iterate towards an optimal solution. And it was like this light bulb went off in my head. It was like, oh, I can use math to build stuff that learns things automatically. And that was like the perfect sweet. I wouldn't say that I knew that I was looking for something like that, but when I found it, I realized that's what I was missing. But looking at the evidence or the observation of how I knew I was missing something was really just I was trying all this new stuff on my own, basically.
So it seems like maybe you had a penchant to explore more when subconsciously things weren't as ideal as they could have been. And I think that that's a natural thing to do. I generally like that. I think experimentation is a really important part of progress and development, whether it's in our data work or it's in your career or in life in general. I think that that's something that I've seen as a recurring theme, is that rather than just head down doing the same thing and feeling aimless, either we naturally start to explore or we can intentionally explore different things to figure out what we like. I see so many people just guessing at what they might like without trying things. And at least for me, all of the insight that I've had about what I like or what I don't like has come from doing things, getting my hands dirty, and metaphorically, obviously. But I really like that avenue that you took. So, something you had also mentioned is that you were building things for the data science team. That is obviously a part of data science work, but it seems to leverage the skill set that you had before. Do you think coming in from software engineering helped you? It hurt you? It was net neutral? Was that how did that play into that equation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I look back at my career, like some of the things I'm most thankful for, well, I would say the biggest thing I'm most thankful for is that I started out as a software engineer. The reason for that is because the foundation you build with those skills is so applicable to like any tech role, essentially. It's definitely not like the only way to do it. You can like pick up those skills later on for sure. But without those skills, I don't know how I would have in that situation made my way into data science. The reason being is because, even saying this today, it's a very competitive field. And so you have to have some niche. You have to like bring something new to the table. Like you're competing against a lot of people who are also gifted, who are also interested, who are also very eager to like get a job. And for me, that competitive advantage was twofold at the time, which was one, had already been working at this company for 2 years and knew the back-end engineering. I knew the stack. I knew everything about it. The other was that data science team was hired in a way that was mostly, these are people who are very smart and have strong mathematical backgrounds and can code, but not software engineers or even close to it. So, it was sort of like nowadays that's less often, like, machine learning engineering is part of like the data science curriculum essentially, or oftentimes. But, 6 years ago, 5 years ago, that was sort of like treated as separately. It was like just getting a model in a notebook running was difficult, or few people knew how to do it. So at the time you could have that be your role where all you did was model building. So, when you apply that to a professional setting, there was something, that team was missing something. And what they were missing was, how do we plug in our models to the business? I remember like one of the things we were building at the time. So this was Trunk Club. So, sort of like a Stitch Fix. But we were trying to automate determining what clothes would fit a customer. So, retail clothes, it's not as simple as I'm a medium, therefore if this brand is a medium, it'll fit me. It's just not how it works. So what we were trying to do is to be able to like do like a user item collaborative filtering, essentially, to be able to determine like which of these shirts is going to fit which people. And we had like the actual like filtering, the collaborative filtering down. We had the model, but we're like, how do we plug this in? Like, what do we do? And so, I came in and I was like, I know how, I can do it. And so it was sort of like natural for me to be brought into the team to work on projects. And then once I had the apprenticeship, it was a very smooth transition towards, let me do some modeling as well. And then by the end, I was just like a full-blown data scientist. So my in was being, familiar with the tech stack and understanding how to do something that the rest of the team didn't. And that's what I try and like tell a lot of people who are trying to get into this field is, think about it from a hiring manager's perspective. Why would they want to hire you over a million other people? If you can give them that reason, they will absolutely do it. You just have to make it very clear.
Let's take a second to hear from one of our amazing sponsors that supports the show. Ever wonder how to keep your AI models not just smart, but responsible and effective? That's why I've partnered with Aporia. Their AI performance platform offers full-scale observability and real-time AI guardrails. Trust me, if you're in the data science field, Aporia's got your back. Don't miss out. Check them out at aporia.com. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation-grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high-performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. So for the hiring manager, a lot of it is thinking about what are the gaps. The gaps could be, hey, we don't have people that understand the technology infrastructure we use. We don't have people that understand whatever we're trying to build next. Maybe it's some large language model infrastructure. It could be that, we don't have anyone that even communicates very effectively on our team with leadership, and that's a gap in what we have. So that to me is a very interesting approach. Is it's not what everyone else is doing, which I think is a fundamental problem. I don't know if I made a video on this yet, but it kills me that you look at a data science project portfolio or past work experience, and everyone's like, well, everyone has these great portfolios. I have to build one just like it. And to me, you're just grouping yourself with everyone else.
Exactly.
And I think that, that's kind of part of the problem, right? Is that you have to find what the gaps are, and how do you do that? What is the approach to, really getting into the mind of the hiring manager, understanding what they're interested in, probably talking to them or like doing research, figuring out what direction the company wants to do. And unfortunately, that's additional work that few people want to do, because it's very easy to say, oh, I just have to build this other project, because there's clear constraints around it.
Yeah. So that's a really good call out, is that, I think it's a misconception that, you want to do what everyone else is doing. Like there is a template for getting a job, especially in today's market, which is extremely competitive. That's not what you want to do. You don't want to be like everyone else. You want to be different from everyone else and stand out as much as possible. You want to show you're competent, but you want to show it in a way that is different and makes you stand out and, gets you to the top 2% of those resumes or whatever it is. When thinking about like, what is it that differentiates people, or how do you solve, what problems are hiring managers having that they're looking for solutions for? Something that I always look for when I'm hiring for data science candidates, and I imagine most hiring managers also struggle with this, is we spend probably 60% of our time trying to corral our team towards doing something that makes sense. And it's kind of a negative way of saying it, but essentially what we do as managers is we connect our team's work so that it aligns with the business. So, we bring in projects, we make sure that these projects are well lined up with, broader objectives, but we can't be totally prescriptive and like build this in exactly this way. That's no one does that. It's not possible. So you have to be able to give like broad or like loose direction of like, build this, but also like use your own intuition for like how you're going to approach that. And the more that someone can understand that on their own, the more it frees up the manager to be able to go and do other stuff. And that is like a manager's dream, is to be able to go and do more without like, to hire more people without having it take up more of their time is the dream. Managers by nature rarely code. I actually code a good amount still now, but I also have a small team. I only have 5 people on my team. But our dream is still to code. Oftentimes we don't. And the reason we don't is because we don't have bandwidth. Why don't we have bandwidth? It's because we're trying to manage everyone else's projects. So if you're interested in trying to like, what can you do to set yourself apart, to help solve problems, leverage that product or business intuition. If you can showcase that early on in an interview to a hiring manager, they are going to love it, because what that means is that they can send you off on something and know that you'll come back to them when you have questions. But other than that, you're going to just steer course. So that's extremely attractive from a hiring manager perspective.
I love how you described product/business intuition there. You described it in a very technical way rather than in a fuzzy way, which I think is important. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea there is that a good employee has the autonomy to understand the key decisions in a technical process and make it integrate into the system so that it provides the correct type of value you want to produce for the organization. So it's rather than, we're like getting buy-in from business people or anything along those lines, it's understanding what the outcome of what you're building is rather than just what the infrastructure of what you're building is. And I think a lot of people view, business intuition, all of these types of things as these fuzzy skills, but I think that they can be completely concrete if you maybe take like an engineering approach to to defining them.
Yeah. So definitely. And, building, like making this even more concrete. So one example that comes to mind recently was my team was trying to, like, we saw a couple reviews that were like indicating, like, is there like a problem in this part of so I work for a company that makes smart dog collars. And we got some like reviews, and we're trying to figure out, is there a problem or is this just like, a bad review or something? And so I had somebody on my team like look into it. And the person that I assigned to it, all my team is actually very good at this because I interviewed for it. But this person in particular is really good at understanding like the implication of the ask. And so when I asked them to, go deep dive, investigate this, I knew that I didn't have to fully articulate exactly what to do, because I knew that they would think about, okay, when I come back with an answer or an analysis or a chart, I know what we're going to do with this, like who we're going to give it to and what they're going to do with that information, or what the range of things is going to be. And therefore I can adapt whatever I'm doing to like be best suited for that use case. So it isn't like, you're a natural entrepreneur who understands business and how to make money. That's not it at all. Really what it is it's looking past the ask. So I asked, go figure out what if there's a problem or not. But really, that's not the ask. The ask is bring back information that will inform us what action to take, if at all, here. And so understanding like the ask behind the ask is really like the value here. Sometimes it's called the XY problem. So the XY problem being somebody asks for X, but they really want Y, and your job is to understand that Y, even though they never asked for it. So it's kind of, a very engineering way of describing business intuition.
I like that. And you sort of get a benefit for your overall team as well. So something that I think about a lot is if you are spending your time divided across solving all these problems, your input is going to be less value. Like 1/5 of your input is going to create less value than 100% of someone else's input if they're even close to as good at understanding problems as you are. So by delegating, but trusting who you delegate to, that they can understand the implications of the problem, it makes your overall team more effective. Because again, you just splitting your brain in 5 different ways, solving 5 different things, means that you're only, again, able to exert 1/5 of the like processing power or intelligence or logic to those problems. It doesn't obviously match up exactly linearly like that, but at the same time, I think the idea is that if these other people can spend all of their time thinking about one problem, they're going to do better than you spending a small portion of your time thinking about that one problem. And hiring a team that can do that is, I wouldn't say the holy grail, but it's a really good start at progress on that front. Yeah. So, in regards to that, in regards to, working as an individual contributor and then moving into managing teams, what was that process like? Where did you go from Trunk Club and then moving along your career now to where you are managing a team?
It's a really good question. It was actually at Gohealth. So I was hired at Gohealth as a senior machine learning engineer, and was basically, my job was like, hey, here's some models, go deploy them. And I was like, all right, let me go do that. Did it. And then started building more models. And at that time, so this was like 2019, the team was like a lot of junior data scientists and data analysts. And so it was pretty natural for me to just start being like the lead. So if you remember at the time, Jeff Gutierrez was the VP, but he managed like, I don't know, like an org of like 25 people. So he was the direct manager of that team. But like, because he had he was building a foundational data org, he didn't have a lot of time to be like, the day-to-day operations person, even though he did actually a very good job of that. At times I would step up and just like be like the unofficial manager. So after a while of doing that, it was just sort of natural for me to be promoted to manager. But it wasn't like, I walked in one day and it was just like, somebody said, hey, you're the manager now. Like I had to fight for it. Like it was something I wanted. And I really had to push for it. Um, One of the reasons it was difficult actually was because we didn't yet have a hierarchy or like really established roles in data yet. It was like a new org, and so everyone was an IC essentially, and we hadn't really thought yet about what does the management layer look like. So in order for me to get promoted to manager, we had to figure that out. So it took some time, but like anything, you just have to push for it. You have to keep asking. You have to be very articulate about what you want. So, I talked to my manager all the time about it. Every one-on-one I would bring it up. And after 5-6 months, eventually they caved. Now that I'm looking back on it, that seems to be a common theme.
Yeah, common theme.
So I keep harassing people until they give in.
Yeah, well, the other side of that is that every good manager should be asking you what you want out of your career. Where do you want to go after this? Yeah. And if they're helping you align with that with inside the organization, you're probably going to produce the most value as an employee, right? If you're doing work that you're not excited about all the time, you're probably not going to be doing your best work. And so I believe that that's the role of a good manager, is to say, how do I give the people on the team what they want that creates the most value for the company while still being able to do all of the things that we currently do? And that's generally not an easy equation. I know at Gohealth, there's like a big period of transition that that's obviously where we met when I was there. And I sort of felt like I had no clue what my role was. I came in as, I think it was a business analytics specialist, where I would be sort of an internal consultant. And then I moved into a product owner role. And I was kind of like, what am I even doing? Like, in theory, this role should not exist if the teams are running effectively, because we also had project managers. We also had these other things. And it was a very interesting stage in my life. I realized that I did enjoy individual contributor roles significantly more than that. But, it's interesting to see that, for example, employees knowing what they want can also bring more stability within an organization. I think you taking leadership over people and ownership and accountability of teams and projects, it helps create structure around a lot of things, which then cascaded into creating a more formalized and effective overall leadership structure, which a lot of people don't think about. It's like, oh, top down, they have to do everything. In startups, in companies that are in flux, individual employees have a lot of control to shape, or can have a lot of control to shape, what the day-to-day is like. And again, I think that that's something that's continually overlooked because people just haven't had those experiences to view it in that light.
Totally. Especially if you're a high impact contributor, you have all the power. Like, I actually try and like preach this to like my team, is like, sometimes I'll get the sense that they don't have a lot of confidence, or they'll be like, sometimes newer employees are like nervous to ask for like vacation early on. I'm like, listen, you need to understand your value here and like what you are worth to this business. And that if you need to check out for a vacation, go do it. Just tell me about it, but like, you don't have to ask me. Like, you are the people who run this business, and you should know that. And you should like think of yourself that way, because if you do, you'll start to be more articulate about what is it that you want, which helps me understand like how to help you. And then ultimately it makes everyone happier. So I prefer when someone on my team like that I'm their manager, I prefer it when they're actually more vocal about like asking for things or telling me what they want to do, because it helps. It takes the guesswork out of it, and it takes a lot off of me to try and figure that out. So the hardest people to manage are when they're like, yeah, I don't really know what I want to do, and they don't want to put in any effort. It's not like they're bad employees. They're not, but it makes it harder for me because I know that I need to think about their future, even if they don't like necessarily think about it on their own. And so the more that they can information or thought process they can give me, the easier my job is.
So it seems like the more people know what they want, the easier it is for their managers, the easier it is for them to actually get what they want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it might not always be easy to implement, but I can always work with that and either come up with something that's like, meet you halfway, work towards it. Basically, what I'm looking for. The first thing I look for when I'm managing somebody new is, what is their goal? What do they want? How do we get there? Like, how do we get there comes after. But the first thing is just like, where do they want to go and what's best for them? So understanding that first, now we can start to go into solution mode.
I like that. And, rewinding a little bit to something you said about their importance to the company, a
Mm-hmm.
really good book that I enjoyed a while ago was So Good They Can't Ignore You. And the idea is if you get really good at something, you become integral to the organization. I was thinking back to Gohealth. If you had left, we would have been so screwed because not a lot of people could have taken over the work you were doing. There just wasn't, you were holding a lot of things together with the team you were managing. In theory, you should have unlimited leverage because losing you from that organization would have led to some pretty catastrophic problems in things getting done every day. And I'm not saying you should necessarily, as an individual contributor, try to be a linchpin in your company where if you go, the company fails. But the more you are like that, the more opportunity you have to ask for time off, raise, position change, any of these types of things, because it's basic incentives and economics at that point. Um, and just as you said, like a lot of the times, some individual employees, if they're in charge of a process that's very important or whatever might it be, it might seem mundane to them, but they don't realize how big of a positive upside they have with the company, but also how much them leaving could create massive downward force.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was aware of that at the time, and I am not going to shy away from saying that I was able to leverage that in negotiations for like a higher up role. Um, but also, I like good relationships really shouldn't come to that. Like you said, it's in everyone's best interest to make people happy, so long as they're being reasonable. In my case, I think I was being reasonable. But the way that I look at it is actually just so if I have someone on my team and I perceive them as a linchpin, which almost never happens. Occasionally it has, but like there are times when that does happen. That actually is not something that I'm comfortable with or in any way convinced to promote someone. Actually, the reason for that is because when you get promoted, you get more responsibility. And if I feel like someone is like has the potential to just like duck out, I'm absolutely not going to give them more responsibility. If anything, I'm doing the opposite. So really, it's like a mutually beneficial. Like, hey, you're doing awesome, and I want to give you more because I know you're going to keep crushing it. Like, obviously, we're going to promote you because you're going to keep taking on new responsibilities anyway. You're going to be happy about it. And that's ultimately what we want. So I would say that, and then looking at it from the other side, sometimes I think managers aren't great about articulating reasons for why someone isn't being promoted. For example, someone may say it's just not the right time or the org isn't ready, when in reality it's that the person is not ready to be promoted. That is not a good move, because what you're doing is you're making the candidate or the employee feel like they're not in control, and that is the worst feeling to have when working at a company, right? You want to feel like you're in control. You want to, we're all adults. We want to feel like adults. What we don't want is to be just sitting there waiting for someone to tell us our future. And so as a manager, it is our responsibility to be able to give people the information that they need to understand like what they need to do in order to get promoted. So I think that's often the case where, someone feels like they're not getting promoted because it's not possible, when in reality it is. They're just not being told what. I think that's another important thing to consider here.
Yeah, I think that's something that, for better or for worse, the large tech companies have done very well at,
Oh
is
yeah.
determining specific criteria and feedback that does get you promoted. I think that there's a lot of things large tech companies do not do well, but that is one that they have pretty well defined. I also think what you were describing about, management or how you manage, that is the goal of management, is to create infrastructure that is resilient, and
Yes.
teams that are resilient. And so, of course, you should not ever have an employee that is a linchpin of anything if you have good leadership practices in place and you're listening to your team. But on the other side of that, I think every employee should be trying to find a way where they create unique value for their team and that, they might be replaceable, but they should, if you're creating unique value, you should be promoted, and someone else should be able to share in that value, or any of those types of things. And that's where I think it's a really unique balancing act, where you're creating this infrastructure as a leader, but you're also raising people up when they deserve it. And it's sort of this moving puzzle, which sounds really stressful now that I think about it. But, but, and that's something that I learned, is that I don't like managing people. I always thought I would. I was like, oh, I want to run an organization. I want to like tell everyone what to do. And I was like, man, I don't. It's not for everyone. I like strategy. I like thinking about how you organize things in the long run, and I like doing individual contributor work. But managing people and eliciting what they want and understanding them and meeting their needs and making them feel like they do have control is something that is a lot more nuanced than I believed going in. And it's really honestly just not something that I personally enjoy like I thought I would. And that was a big shock to me as well, because I love people. I just don't like being responsible for people.
Yeah, I think maybe another way of phrasing that is also mentoring is awesome. Like that is the best of both worlds, where you can mentor. And I think I've also thought this too, is that like, people think that if you like mentoring, then you will also like managing, and those two are not the same thing. They have a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of negative aspects to management that you don't have to deal with as a mentor. And so, like as a mentor, the mentee, the mentor is not responsible for the mentee's like promotions, for example. So there's no like arguments over that. There's no, compensation discussions. There's no, one-on-ones with like constructive feedback or something like that. So I don't know if you like mentoring people, Ken, but like I love mentoring people, but there is an aspect of management that I find very emotionally exhausting.
Yeah, I totally get that. So, from Gohealth, tell me about how your sort of management and leadership roles have changed or cultivated all the way up to what you're doing now.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I left Gohealth thinking I had management down to a T, and then I went to Wayfair. So for context, when I was at Gohealth, I think I was managing maybe like 4 or 5 people at the time. Like at most, I was managing like 6 or 7. But going from 4 to 5 to 6, even 7, to what I did at Wayfair, which was managing 15 total, like an org of 15, that was such a big jump that I was like, whoa, I need to rethink my strategy here. The reason for that is because when you're managing that big of an org, your role is no longer the same. My role at GoHealth was like, I know the full tech stack. I can literally help with anything.
And you coded a lot, if I remember.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Well, I wrote most of the original framework. So like I knew I could jump back in if I needed to. A lot of it was changed since like I wrote it, like people improved on it, but like I knew where to go for anything. I got to Wayfair and I'm like, holy shit, this is way different than everything. And I remember thinking like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure this out. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure out how to code, how to get up to speed on this tech stack. I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure out how to manage these people who are like, a lot of them were like very tenured at Wayfair. And what I realized is that like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to figure it out if I don't change my philosophy. So some things I changed were I had to be comfortable letting go of a lot of the technical aspects that I used to have. I had to be comfortable not being the expert on a lot of the tech stack that I used to be. So I had some like really good tech leads, and I had to learn to earn their respect without being able to tell them like, I know this better than you. And that was a shift for me. You can earn someone's respect without being better at them, at things. And that, it seems obvious when I say it out loud now, but really like, first time managers are typically more experienced than the people on their team. But I went to a place where I was no longer more experienced, yet I still had to earn their respect. I came into an org of 15, all of them had been there longer than me. They all knew the tech stack better than me. And I still had to figure out a way to like earn their trust and respect. So that was different. Trying to think through
so how
exactly.
did you earn How did you go about earning that trust and respect?
Yeah. So one thing that I don't think will ever go away is one of the best ways to earn an IC's respect or a strong technical person's respect is to demonstrate that you are technically competent. There's nothing worse than reporting into somebody in a technical role who has just no business being there because they don't understand tech or they never were an IC. And personally, I think every person involved in technology, like in a management role, should have been an IC at some point. I think you have to be. Like, it's really hard to be good at that role without being a former IC. I don't think you need to be like, a principal or anything, but like you should know how to code. So I was able to demonstrate that, like, hey, I don't know this code as well as you do. I don't know this tech stack as well as you do, but I know what I'm talking about. So that was one thing. But the other part was being able to help them solve problems that they had. So when I came to Wayfair, a lot of the challenges that my team was facing was nothing related to technology. It was aligning. It was being able to align on the projects that they had with other teams. So Wayfair is a huge org. Like data science is like 300 people or something like that. And so to get anything done, you need like three different orgs working together. And what my org was struggling with was having exact requirements mapped between the two teams to get something done. And a lot of it was simply just that like people were talking past each other, like, two ICs like would like communicate through like a Jira ticket or something like that. And I could see that like there just wasn't like syncing. So a lot of what I did was like, okay, I see where the problem is and I can help you solve this. And just doing that earns people's respect. Like showing that you can help solve their problems definitely goes a long way of earning respect.
I like that a lot. It seems like um, just being it's like kind of being useful and not a hindrance is a big thing with leadership. Is how do I make it as easy as possible for the people that I manage to do their best work? And sometimes that isn't even technical at all. If they're like, hey, this person has my back, they want to make it, they're going to advocate for us when we work with other teams. They're going to
That's that
understand
too.
what we're doing
Yeah.
and lead that way, especially going into an organization where you can't possibly learn everything. I find that is so valuable. uh, Probably a little hard coming off of where you're working before where you did know everything. um, but how do you personally approach making that cognitive shift? Because I know for me it would be hard. Basically, oh, I
Yeah.
know everything um, about this. I built it into, oh, someone else built this, and I either have to learn it or acclimate to it. Like, what goes on in your brain?
Yeah. And actually you touched on something that I had not that is really good, which is that having the team know that you have their back is critical. And something comes to mind where I remember talking with one of the people who was like one of the strongest tech leads in my org, and I remember asking them questions about a project that they were working on, and like I was trying to understand like why they were making certain decisions, and I didn't know them that well at the time, but like at the time they were perceiving my questions as like criticism, like, oh, this is not the right way to do it. When really, like, me, I'll just like dig into anything and just ask a ton of questions, just because I want to like wrap my head around like what we're doing. But at the time, what I didn't realize was that there was like a larger kind of, I don't want to call it political, but like there was debate around how to approach this certain problem that we were trying to solve. And this person saw my questions as like being on the other side of that. And I was not aware of that. And I also wasn't aware that like the nature of my questions were leading towards that. So actually there was like a bit of like friction initially with me and this person. Not it's not like we like, work well together, but there was not a total sense of trust. But like once we powered through that and once I was able to show like, hey, I'm asking these questions because I'm going to go to bat for you, like in these discussions, then it was like night and day difference of working together. Was that like there was zero filter, we could say anything we wanted. And that was so important for trust, where, I mentioned like the tech, showing that I understood tech, and helping to solve problems. None of that matters if they know that you have their back. Like that goes so far. So I think that's a really good call out. But to answer your question about like the mind shift, it wasn't easy and it wasn't like overnight. It was I remember my first day at Wayfair, we also we closed on our house. And so I had like really bad COVID. And so I was like, there was like so many things going on in my life. And I remember like the first like couple weeks, I'm just like, man, mine over my head. But you kind of just like, you throw into the deep end, you learn to figure it out. Instincts kick in, you start to understand like how people operate, what makes them tick. You understand your role in the situation, you understand where the problems people are having are, and you kind of just insert yourself into those big problem areas. So I don't think I have really good advice for like, here's how you should change your thought process, other than just like, throw yourself at the biggest problem there and figure it out essentially.
I think a big part of that, which is something I'm learning more recently, is that patience is really important. A lot of the times we get frustrated because we don't understand a concept. We get frustrated because we can't pick something up as quickly as we thought we'd be able to. But in our biology, there's just a waiting mechanism or like a processing mechanism that's built in before we can truly grasp things. Just like you were describing gradient descent, it probably wasn't the first time that you went through it that you just immediately understood it.
No.
You probably poured over it a couple times, and one of the things that like ideas hit people in the shower, right? Things have to sort of match up where you maybe see something else subconsciously that looks like the pattern. You go, oh, I get that. I mean, an example is, I've been training a lot of jujitsu for a while. There's some movements when I was starting, I couldn't get the feel for them. And it wasn't till I've been training for, 2 years that I realized, oh, my body physically could not get into that position. So I couldn't do the movement. It's like, well, that's why I was struggling so much, is because I wasn't flexible enough or I wasn't strong enough in this area. And so a lot of the times when we're going into new scenarios, we just haven't built up the prerequisites to understand what's going on. And we have to learn sort of all these things in unison for things to eventually start clicking. And that is largely just a function of being patient with yourself and realizing that you're not going to understand everything overnight. Like, things are not going to necessarily click right away. That does take time, which is, obviously difficult for people that are really used to like hyper focusing and solving problems as like an engineer or data scientist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, let me take a stab at trying to say that another way, which I think is helpful, and I hadn't thought about until you communicated that, which is like, I think part of maturing as a professional, or even just as a person, is like over time, you'll start to understand what you're good at and build up confidence. When we go from school to work, like it's such a night and day shift of like school, there's this fast feedback loop of like, you learn, you go to lecture, you get a lesson, you have a quiz the next week, you get an A, I'm good. You have this like fast, like you can put in the time and the effort to get that instant, like I'm good feeling. At work, especially in tech, your first few years, you're just like, oh man, like I'm trying not to get fired here because this is so hard. And you feel in over your head. And honestly, I felt like that probably at least 50% of the time, the first 4 years of my career. And it takes a while of like being thrown into new situations and like, navigating your way out of them or to the top of them before you really start to trust yourself. At least for me, that's how it felt. But now that I've been in the industry for 8-9 years and done this a few times, I feel like now is really when I'm starting to feel just absolutely confident in myself that like I'm going to be able to be thrown into a difficult situation and navigate my way out or solve it. And I know that I don't know the answer right now, but just having the confidence that I'll be able to figure it out is something that just comes with maturity. And I think that's something that young professionals could really, I don't know exactly how they can internalize it, because a lot of it does come from experience, but like being comfortable not being the best at something, or being comfortable not knowing the answer to something, that is a side of maturity, is like feeling comfortable with that feeling. You know what I mean?
I resonate so hard with that. So I personally believe the core of engineering is problem solving. Mm-hmm. And when you're confronted with something you don't understand, being able to pick it apart, figure out how it works, and come to a solution with all the tools available to you. I don't think engineering is about what coding language, what programming language you use, what infrastructure stack you use, any of those types of things. It's about, hey, we have this problem. What tools do I have at my disposal that I can use to build a solution? And you can
Mhm.
choose from all different types of technology stacks, all different types of languages, any of these types of things. But that meta skill of being able to understand the problem and figure out what I can use to build that solution is fundamentally valuable to anyone looking into this domain. And that makes it so that, for example, we've talked, you were working on projects in multiple different programming languages just to learn them or fool around. The fundamentals of most programming languages are largely similar, unless you're like talking about like call by value or pass by value or whatever it might be. And there's some
Uh-huh.
like slight differences. But the idea is that, okay, this might be more performant for this specific use case. I can choose this tool and use it here. And that's part of that problem solving process. And that's maybe the next iteration of, okay, we can solve this problem. How do we make it run more efficiently? How do we make it more cost effective? How do we do all of these other things? Um, but that's not based on the same foundation that we learn in school. We learn in school that
Uh-huh.
everything has a right answer and a right process. And I think we're getting better at that now. It's like you can solve these problems in multiple different ways in school or whatever it might be. But grasping that concept of, hey, our goal is to build a solution with the tools we have to this problem, and we're starting from ground zero, and we're going to have to learn about the tools, and we're going to have to learn about the different processes and study what other people have done before and look at case studies and Google a bunch and use ChatGPT now and whatever this is. That's what makes it fun too, is that you get to try all this stuff and you get to figure out and come and say, hey, I built this thing and it came out of my brain, and no one else has really built anything like this before. Most software engineering work is a culmination of a bunch of things other built, but each individual thing is largely unique. And I think that that's one of the coolest things is, like, how often do you get to say that every individual software engineer probably built something that nobody else has built before? Right?
Yeah.
That's really sick to me. Um,
Yeah.
so I got really excited there.
No, I know. Yeah, no, I have the same passion. So this is something that I like, the ability to think past what your perceived role is sort of, it ties back to that product business intuition. Now, maybe this is even a better way of describing that, because I think, there's this like industry term like soft skills, which personally I now think is actually like it's a terrible term, because it sort of like makes it seem like it's not important. Like hard skills are like the real ones, and soft skills are just these fluffy things that posers can do, which is so not true. What I really think it is that like if you are very comfortable with your own ability, you don't try and solve problems with a very narrow focus. You trust your mindset to just perceive the problem as it is, and then come up with a solution. And you don't put up these unnecessary swim lanes, or pigeonhole yourself into an answer. And for example, one of the things that I always look for in hiring for my team is I look for people who really spend time to identify the problem before they even switch to solution mode. So, even for technical interviews, for like a data science interview, the common one I do is like a 60-minute live modeling session. And what I'll do is I'll give them a very basic data set, from Kaggle. It could be the Titanic data set, something like that. But the point is not that I need them to build a model. The point is that I'm going to give them a technical request embedded in a somewhat realistic world problem, and see if they can identify the real problem and not be distracted by the technical nature of the ask. So, for example, one that I no longer use because I keep talking about it to everyone is there's a Kaggle data set around like predicting heart attacks. So like your target is whether or not the person had a heart attack, and all the inputs are like vital signs and blood pressure and things like that. And I used to just do an interview where it was, okay, build a classifier. Anyone who's ever seen like scikit-learn can do that. It's not difficult. But what I started to do differently once I became like more of a mature manager and realized like what makes somebody successful or not, is I would just wrap that in a relatively simple business question and then basically have the same technical ask. So rather than saying build a model that predicts heart attacks, I would say pretend like you work for a hospital or an emergency room, and you have a constant queue of patients, 20 at a time, waiting to be admitted into the ER, but there's no capacity, and you have to figure out who to let through and who not to let through. And you can use this data set to build a model that says this person is likely to have a heart attack and this is not. And then I'll throw in like a constraint or two, like, you can only let 5 people through a day or whatever, something like that. And it's the exact same data set, exact same technical ask, like the signature of the problem is the exact same. But by just adding like a paragraph of context, it changes the nature of what the ideal solution is. And it forces you to actually think about this model within like the real world space. And you would be amazed at how many people just blow past that other part. Even though I like slow people down and will say, hey, read this carefully because you need to understand this in order to solve this problem. Even when I say that, so many people just get caught up in the technical aspect and don't even think about the other part. And oftentimes I've observed that those are the same people who struggle on the job to actually be able to think independently. And the people who do sort of pause, think about it, come up with an objective, and then solve that objective, the people who do that well are also the people who can be thrown at a problem and I can trust that they're going to go solve it. Right. So,
Yeah.
this is definitely something like you can like interview for, you can practice at. It's something you can get better at.
I think problems like those are inherently interesting because the way you view, for example, the way a hospital would view that versus the way an insurance company would view that are totally different. A hospital might be really concerned with, this type of screen, yes, we have the data for this historically, but this type of screen is really time intensive. And we could maybe get 10 patients through the door if we didn't just do this one screen. But our model is like only 2% worse if we're not doing that screen. That's an easy trade-off for a hospital to make if they can see that many more people. The greater good that they cause is significantly higher. But you also have to think, okay, well, you start thinking about precision and recall and those types of things, because at a hospital, if someone's coming to you with this issue, you want to be sure you're right, or you want to probably cast a slightly broader net just to be safe or whatever it might be. So there's so much nuance in that rather than just how you were describing it before. I would hope you really get to see how people think and approach problems like that.
You do.
So
Like the best thing people can do is just ask questions. Like my favorite thing is when somebody's like, hey, can I ask you a few questions? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Because if this were real life, if this were a real job and you just started on like a task without asking anyone any questions, I'd be worried.
yeah, I actually read this book very recently called A More Beautiful Question. And it talks about how valuable questions are for everything, for essentially creating good work, finding out and identifying who you are. And there's a couple frameworks that I like. So this framework is essentially why, what if, how, and it breaks down very clearly essentially all the elements that might be struggling with someone. So for example, why does the hospital care about doing this? Why is the hospital doing this type of screening? They might find that, hey, this screening is the wrong type of screening that we're doing. There might be some other issue in the area that's causing these heart attacks that's more preventable than just, I don't know, doing the other side of that, right? Like it might be better to, when patients come in and they have bad symptoms, they might, or they're just like morbidly obese, or they have some of these other challenges, they might also end up coming to the hospital reporting a heart attack later. It could be easier to solve that other problem that might cascade into this other one. Obviously, clearly hypothetical. The other one is what if. So like, what if we did this? What if we did this? What if we did this? You can start proposing solutions and wargaming them out. And then how is the implementation? What does it take to truly build this out? And I've been using that framework in evaluating my own life, evaluating all the things in my work. And it's crazy that essentially 3 types of questions can get to the root cause of almost everything. There's obviously 5 whys analysis for root cause analysis, but just realizing that there's all these different types of questions you can ask. A lot of people feel like they're just constrained when they really don't need to be. So that
Right.
was very eye-opening. I recommend this book to a lot of people.
I was going to say
So
another way to call it is I call it flailing, when people they have like they're so nervous that to get to the answer that they just start asking random questions as opposed to thinking strategically. So maybe that's a good way to like avoid flailing, is to have like come in with a process for how to find or how to ask questions.
Oh, I like that. I've never thought of it the other way with the flailing, but that does happen too. Huh.
Mm-hmm. All the time in interviews.
Yeah, I haven't given an interview in like 4 years, so I'm a little out of practice. But I want to get into the interviews in a little bit. I think that that's an important thing. We've talked a lot about how you hire your team and the types of questions you ask. Before we do that, I want to maybe end your career arc and learn, what are you doing now? And then, like, let's dive back into the interviewing stuff, because I know you have some pretty strong opinions there.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Yeah. So I am currently the VP of Data Science and Machine Learning at Phi. So I was looking around to see if we had a dog collar laying around. My company makes smart dog collars. So you can think of us as like a Fitbit, but for dogs. So we do like, step counting, GPS tracking. We're starting to do some more actual machine learning and detecting more interesting things. I'm not sure how much I can talk about it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But I lead a team of 5. When I first started, it was just me and one other person, so I helped build up the team. The company's still a startup, so we're like 150 people or so. But I'm actually I'm going to be well, how much do you want me to talk about that before I talk about the next thing?
As much as you want. We'll figure a way to tie it all in. I'm not worried.
Okay. Yeah. So we can talk more about Phi, because I think there are some interesting aspects to it before I get to the next stage. But so I think every part of my career, I've learned something new, and every time I'm about to take on something new, I think I've got it all figured out. I went from Wayfair to Phi, and this is going to be a breeze. Like, I've been at companies much larger than this and managed way larger teams. And then I come and I'm like, whoa, there's something new to figure out here. And, I think one of the hardest things to do as a professional is when you are experienced, to just be put into this new position at another company when you don't come with a reputation. So like, when at Gohealth, I was able to establish a reputation, and the way that I operated, I didn't realize it at the time, heavily leveraged that reputation. I could talk to most people in the business, and like they would take a meeting with me. I could ask for things. When I went to Wayfair, and then again when I went to Phi, it's like you don't have that. You no longer have that reputation of like what you've done that's successful. And even though it may be a higher up role, you still have to rebuild that reputation and start from scratch and be able to start all over again in convincing people, hey, I'm good. Hey, I can do this. I actually need what I'm asking. And I learned that I realized that pretty quickly at Phi, was that, I have to do this like very quickly, because things move fast here, and I'm going to need to ask for things in the near future. And I can't have people second guessing me when I ask for something. So the thing that I learned at Phi was, it doesn't matter what level you are. When you get to a new business, there's 2 things you got to do. First one is just stay quiet and don't voice your opinion about too many things. I've seen so many people make this mistake where they join a new company, they join a new team, and it's very, you really want to just like say, this is not the way we should be doing things. And until you've been there long enough, you don't realize why something is the way it is until you've been there for a little bit. So I always recommend people is like, when you join a new team, just like, spend 2 to 3 months before you really start making any major recommendations, because it's very, from the other side, it's very abrasive to perceive that. So that was something that I have learned at that time. The other thing I've learned was you have to be able to quickly demonstrate value, even if it's small. So, for me, I was like hired as an exec, as a VP, but still, despite that, I needed to earn a reputation. And, at startups, you want to have a reputation for action, like delivering something fast and then providing value. So I immediately started looking for low hanging fruit. What can I do? What skills do I have that have this company hasn't seen yet that I can like leverage? And luckily, I was able to find a few. A lot of them were just some root cause analysis that had been kind of hanging. No one had done yet. I just dug into them and actually like found some good answers. But I think Phi was so interesting because it was everything that I'd done already at a smaller scale, and yet I was still learning really, really new things about it. Um, yeah, I don't know if there's anything more you want to talk through there specifically, or I could talk about building the team too and things like that.
Yeah, let's talk about building the team. So you said you started as two people, and then
Yeah,
now you have a team of five. What was the first role you filled? How did you go about viewing that, especially at a startup, to say, hey, this is
yeah,
what we need to be scalable and effective?
yeah. So when after a couple months of being there, I realized that what we needed a few things, but one of them was really sound data infrastructure. So we had data, we had, a data warehouse, but it wasn't what you would call like a modern data stack by any means. And so getting new stuff, getting a new analysis, any kind of like new Tableau request even required basically like rebuilding everything from scratch. Like we didn't have like intermediate models like you would have in DBT or something like that. So I realized we need to build this up and we need to do it right. And to do that, you need somebody very senior. So when I talked to the C-suite and I talked to the talent team, I said we need two people. We need an analytics engineer and we need a data engineer, and they have to be extremely senior because what we can't do is we can't hire people and have them do this haphazardly. Like you can't like actually you can't. There's too much at risk to do this wrong that we need to do it right the first time and we need to keep building on it. So I went into, hardcore hiring mode where I was probably doing 15 to 20 hours of interviewing a week for those two roles. And what I think is interesting about that is that a lot of people say like, well, what tech stack did you look for? And I'll tell them I didn't look for a tech stack because I don't think that's relevant. It isn't important what the tech stack is. What you need to do is to hire the people. And the people that I needed people who were like very collaborative and willing to work with anyone because that's how the business that I work for operates. Like you are working with everyone. It's relatively small. If you're not remote and you're in the office, you'll be sitting next to a bunch of people and a bunch of dogs. But really what I was looking for was people who were self-motivated, could figure out the right solution and wouldn't be constrained by any framework because I knew that even though we might have a plan right now for a specific framework, things are going to change. We're going to add new stuff, new developments will come. And I can't pigeonhole ourselves into just one thing because it's convenient for the short term. So, I'll talk about hiring in a bit, but I think it is critical to, when people say like, when you're building a data team, like, what do you start with? And you start with the right people is the most important thing is to start with that and then let the tech stack follow.
That seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, in the spirit of what we're talking about with delegation earlier too, is that if you hire the right people, they probably have good insight on the tech stack and how to choose the right tools, build the correct infrastructure that is resilient to your use case. I mean, I'm sure you do know pretty well. You've worked in a lot of organizations, but I found that when you're, just like before, when you're dividing attention versus solely focusing on learning the infrastructure and what data you have and those types of things with the eye of building that stack, it generally helps to have someone who's like very specifically a data engineer or to work with or to have multiple people thinking about it because we're a little bit myopic in what we see is that, we only know what we know. The more people with sort of specialized knowledge like that bouncing ideas off of each other can help to build something that's arguably more resilient in the long run, even if it's slightly different than what you'd envisioned before. I
Mm-hmm.
also think it is very valuable for you to have something that was envisioned before, because then it's something for other people to play off and adjust to. I mean, the amount of work you have to do to start and create a plan is for some people very uncomfortable and like unclear and overwhelming, but having a clear plan lets you have a point of difference to be able to push off of, or to latch onto. And that's something I've learned more recently, is how valuable the planning side of things is that a bad plan is generally better than no plan at all.
Oh yeah.
Because when you don't have any plan, people just flounder around and panic. When you do have a plan, it's very easy to change a plan, to adapt it to how you want. But just having something to stick to is very comforting psychologically.
Yeah, it's also easier to like formulate an opinion when you have something to go off of. Like, it's easier to say, no, actually, I think we should do this than it is to just think of that on your own. Totally agree. Yeah, and then, once we hire those two staff level people, kind of shape the roles in the right way, then it was, okay, now we've got the infrastructure going. Now we need people who can kind of just really interface with the business, understand the needs, and then go, fetch the data from this infrastructure and do a lot of the, faster moving things as opposed to infrastructure. So that's how we ended up. We hired two more data analysts. So yeah, I think we're six people, including myself, five. We got three data analysts, a staff data engineer, and a staff analytics engineer using a modern data stack. Really happy with how it turned out.
So can you explain to me how you hire an analytics engineer and maybe a little bit more about that position? I mean, that's something that is coming more into vogue. And I think for a lot of people, it's not as clear how they fit into the organization and like what value they provide.
For sure. So, and it's funny you say that because I had the same questions, maybe 9 months ago or a year ago when I started thinking about like what I needed to hire for. I'm just thinking about where to start. So a data engineer, historically has been like, I take data and I move it from one spot to another. So it could be, like I'm moving data from the company's transactional Postgres MySQL database into a Snowflake or Databricks or whatever data warehouse, and they're responsible for those pipelines. That is still like a job, definitely. But it is becoming like that is somewhat becoming distinct from the other side of data engineering, which is assume that the data exists in the data warehouse. How do we transform it in a way that is useful towards business stakeholders? And those two tasks are so different that they're starting to shape into different roles. And the former is still being called data engineer. I've not heard any specific like new term for it, but the newer one is being called an analytics engineer. And basically the role is that you want to be able to expose your data tables, your data marts, whatever you're calling it, in a way that is easily accessible or consumable to the business. And you want to be able to do it in a way that's modular so that when you want something new or you have to make a change, you don't have to, go back to the raw source tables and do all the joins from scratch. So it's sort of like software engineering, but specifically for data is I think the best way to think about it. So, DBT, it was such a bit, and in fact, I think they actually coined the term analytics engineer, which was genius from a branding perspective. But if you've ever used their tool, it's amazing how easy it is to use that, because it was so clear that this is what's been missing from the data engineering field, where there didn't used to be an easy way to do modular data transformations. Like, I don't even remember at Gohealth, but like trying to read that, what was it? I don't even remember the language, but it was like visual was like the way that it was done. And I'm like, there's not even code here. How am I supposed to interpret how these transformations are happening? But then you go into DBT and you see this like very clean, like lineage graph, like it's very readable. It's just like Jinja and SQL. And this analytics engineering role is essentially a software engineer for data. But what they're good at is, in addition to SQL and writing stuff in DBT, for example, they're really good at understanding the business and understanding the best way to represent data that will be useful. So a good analytics engineer isn't just, responding to requests, but they're thinking about, okay, I understand how the business works. I understand what people are going to want a few months from now. Let me think about how to organize this data architecture in a way that will make it very easy for us to present that, 2 to 3 months from now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So let me try to put it in my own words so I understand. So like a pure data engineer now is very focused on probably more maintaining the stack and making data accessible from new sources, building that into a data lake or any larger infrastructure that you have, making sure that it's reliable, like everything scaling correctly and things along those lines. And then the analytics engineer is focused on taking that data that's in like reasonably good condition in a singular place and making it accessible to like a data scientist or data analyst for, let's say there's specific use cases that they know data analysts are going to be needing. That data is maintained, updated, and reliable in a specific format that makes any of the dashboarding or any of the model building as accessible as possible. Maybe they're not doing the specific queries and saying, hey, here's like this table with exactly what you need and it's updated frequently, but they're at least making it so that the data analyst can write maybe one SQL query or create one like simple pipeline to access exactly what they would need for whatever they're going to produce. Is that sort of framing it?
Exactly. And
Okay.
yeah, another way that I forgot that, again, DBT uses this in their marketing is an analytics engineer is the T in ETL. They're the transform layer. So exactly as you described, it makes it going from, if you need data and instead of doing a very complicated join or SQL query, it's, you join two tables or it's just a where clause, becomes like very easy to access things in an easy way. So yeah, that's right. And
I
just to be
like the
clear,
proactive. Yeah.
yeah, oh, sorry, I was going to say, people are probably going to argue with my definition of data engineering. I'm just trying to be as like generic as I can. Like in general, lately, that's how I've seen the term data engineer used, but it's probably going to change soon anyway.
I think that that's the nature of the game.
Yeah,
But by clearly defining things more frequently, I think we also start to help shape how people define things. I mean, historically, I think that there's been a big problem in the space about what the role of individual people is. And I think the more content you produce around it, the more people say what they think it is, it actually helps because it gives some concrete terms around these things.
right.
And then someone will eventually be like, well, I collected all this data on what people think data engineers are, and this is what the prevailing
Yeah,
opinions or whatever it might be is. Um, so, you know, I, I forgot one thing about your past that I want to bring up.
yeah.
Before we get into let's get into the interview, and this will be maybe something we end
Okay.
on. So, um, we've talked quite a bit offline, and I think you've been vocal on LinkedIn about how interviewing is and how you think it could be improved. Can you maybe dive into what the problem with interviewing data scientists is, or like data roles is now, and then how you would go about changing that system? Obviously, we touched on it a little bit, especially around asking the types of questions or creating the type of environment where people can get more to the cause of things and ask the right questions around it. But open that up a little bit for me, please.
Yeah, for sure. So let me articulate what I think the biggest problems are with the way that data science, or more generally data roles, are being interviewed for. If you think about like a standard interview pipeline, typically it resembles something like this, which is you do a recruiter screen where the recruiter calls you, asks you some basic logistical questions. Assuming you check all the boxes, you'll get to the next stage, which is usually like a hiring manager screen or a senior person screen, where they'll basically just see like, okay, is this person like, who they say they are in terms of like what they've done with technology? Are they reasonable? But it's not like a major investment yet. It might be like a 60-minute screen where they do some basic questions, but it's not meant to like really fully assess a person. It's meant to just like weed out the people who have somehow made it this far. But even during that stage, there's, some technical questions being asked. And then you make it to the final panel round, or sometimes in between, there's a take-home project. And then you make it to the final panel round. And if you do a take-home project, typically it's a modeling exercise. Here's a data set, solve the problem, give it back, and we'll evaluate it. And then if there's a panel round, you'll do any number of things. Typically, there's 1 to 2 softer side skills interviews, collaboration or cross-functional. Maybe it's leadership if you're going for a management role. But then you'll also do like a whiteboarding exercise or something like that where you're designing a database. And then maybe another modeling exercise or machine learning exercise. So, thinking through that, okay, well, let me tell you now what actually differentiates someone being successful, or at least what I think or have perceived. What it means to be successful in data science has really nothing to do with most of that. To be successful in data science, you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be an expert software engineer. You don't have to be an expert machine learning engineer. You don't have to be an expert at math. You don't have to be an expert at anything. But if you have the right combination of all of those things, as well as product framing or intuition, whatever you want to call it, you can excel. And what I think no interview does right now well is understand that, and understand that there is no one size fits all way for someone to succeed, and that various personas or profiles or attributes can result in a very successful person. You think about like my profile versus yours, Ken. Like, we're very different in terms of like what our background strengths are, like how we came into data science. We came at it from 2 totally different angles. But just because that they're different, if we were to be interviewed by an interview process, I'm sure that we would be scored very differently depending on the interview. And that's sort of like BS, right? Because it's what we should be evaluating is this person going to be successful in this role? Not does this person match what is typically thought of as an ideal data scientist? So, for example, when I think about the data scientists who I've worked with who have been the most successful, most of them would not crush a data science, a typical data science interview. They would do well. They would, they'd probably pass it, but they wouldn't crush it. And in today's market, people have to crush interviews to get jobs. People have to be the best because there's so many people applying for the same jobs that you really need to stand out. If you don't stand out according to a specific definition of, being good at data science, you're going to get rejected. And in reality, if people understood, if people took successful data scientists, looked at their skill set, and then backed into, okay, how would we have evaluated for this? You'd end up with something totally different than what the current data science interview looks like. So big picture, I think that is like the main issue that I see is that like we are not evaluating based off of who is successful. We are evaluating off of like what is taught in data science curriculums, which is totally incorrect in my opinion.
So it's like based off a like heuristic view of what people believe to be successful versus what is actually successful.
Yeah. So yes, that is definitely the main thrust of it. Another way to think about it is, well, let me give a data science or machine learning way of thinking about this. Let's think about how PCA works. PCA is like you or more generally like linear algebra. PCA works where you take a data set and you understand its principal components, right? You like rearrange the axes along which the variation occurs. The linear algebra comparison is you have like eigenvectors and eigenvalues. And the way that I think interviewing should be done, instead of the way it currently is you need to understand the axes along which someone's strengths are, and then measure against those axes. So, the correlation here would be find their eigenvector in the first interview, measure the eigenvalue of those eigenvectors in the second interview. Because I think the best way to understand somebody's likelihood of success is to evaluate them along their strengths, not along these arbitrary strengths, right? Because if people are really good at their strengths, they are likely going to figure out a way to succeed, regardless of their background, regardless of what you're interviewing them for. And nobody interviews that. Why? Because it means you have to come up with a different interview for everyone. But I think that's worth doing. I think it's worth considering is understanding how can I adapt a screening process to find the best talent without having to just use like the same interview process that everyone else is using. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think another wrinkle in that is that the individual roles probably vary in what strengths are most relevant for them. It's
Oh yeah.
probably less variance as the strengths for the individual people and what they're best at and what they apply. But, a role where someone has essentially to interface with people constantly compared to one that's like more traditionally individual contributor, someone, even if their strengths are unbelievably good at maybe like a more dedicated style of work, is probably not going to have the correct match for that other side of it. So that's like a two-sided market equation, right? But I agree 100%. I think that it needs to be dramatically more customization for the individual as well as for the company to figure out what the match is, because there is how many, I mean, I've seen it throughout my entire career, how much mismatch there is between the individual and the company that they go into, and they don't feel challenged. And I mean, that's probably the biggest problem that we see, is that there's no, these people that are highly indexed in the interview process get into the role, and they're like their index for the role is abysmally low. And I think what you're describing would seek to solve that sort of problem as an externality as well.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think it's more so than just what I was saying before, which is like, trying to understand somebody's strengths, but it's thinking about like success, right? Like everything should be based around success. It shouldn't be based around, there's this, aura of, well, interviews need to be fair and therefore they need to be the same. And that really infuriates me, because it's like, if an interview needs to be fair and people are different, then why is the interview the same? Right? Like that doesn't make any sense at all. So there's this notion of like, or people are scared to move away from the same. And but if I think if we want to both succeed as companies and teams, we need to understand the nuances of what is going to work well in our own teams, and then curate that as what we're looking for in candidates. Think about it. Like another thing here is, you could have the exact same role at the exact same company, but two different managers, and the type of person that's going to succeed in that role is going to change depending on which manager you have. I think about my manager, the last 3 employers I've had, and the types of people that would work well in that situation are very different, right? And so you need to think about, like, no one ever says in a job description, by the way, my manager is very hands-off. Like, right? They're never going to put that in there, but they should, because like, in order to find a person who's going to succeed there, if the manager's hands off, you need a very self-driven person who's just going to take charge. If you have another, like a person who's waiting to be told what to do all the time, working for a hands-off manager, that's not going to work. So why is it that we don't, articulate that? It's because it's hard. It's difficult.
So where's the data set to be able to determine those match criteria? Or how do you build that data set?
So it's a good question. Trying to think about how far I want to go into this. Let me start by saying this. What I think the first step is to not think about hiring as, here's a job description, here's a resume, do these 2 things match? I think it's total garbage. It is outdated. Everyone's resume looks the same today. Every job description looks the same. They're all generated by ChatGPT. It's just like a ridiculous situation. In any case, I think we need to move past that and think about, okay, people who are identifying candidates for roles, there should be some sort of like more information given. The employer should be giving more information around the actual conditions of the role, who the manager is, how many people are on the team, what type of skill set the team has. And then backing into from that, here is the ideal criteria for a candidate, and actually sticking to that when seeking candidates, and not just, taking all of that and then hiding it underneath this very generic job description. So I think it's really focusing on exposing information. And so when I think about hiring, I think the first way to improve it is we need to start going a couple layers deeper than what we're currently doing as a hire marketplace. and start to understand roles better, understand employers better, and understand candidates better. I see a resume and I'm like, I can infer a good amount, but there's so much that's still hidden beneath that, where I talk to somebody for 30 seconds and I've learned so much more in that 30 seconds than I have, reading their resume. That should be visible, right? We should be able to showcase that. We should be able to articulate our strengths so that we're not all going to market shotgun applying to jobs or whatever. Employers aren't sifting through 10,000 resumes. Like, we should be able to start self-selecting a bit more. And that just starts with giving people more information.
So that could start at the company saying specifically what the requirements of the role are, like what they're actually doing at the role rather than what the requirements of the role are. And that might help to essentially facilitate the skills that are needed, rather than what like are perceived to be needed. Because I think that there's some level of abstraction that you go into when you try to define what the skills are needed versus what the actual work itself entails, right? Is that sort of an example of what you're describing?
Yeah, let me just take it the final way. So I mentioned before that. So like Five is my current company, but I'm actually going to be starting my own business in a few weeks here. So I've got a few things going on in my life that are making this the right decision to do at this time. But I'm going to be starting a business, and this business is going to focus on this problem, which is how do we improve hiring for both employers and candidates. And the way that I'm going to start solving it is by being that intermediate layer. So having someone who's built teams before go into, act as a recruiter, talk to the hiring manager and say, hey, tell me, forget the job description, forget the skill sets. Just tell me what made you think I need this role? Tell me that. And like, tell me about what you want to build or whatever. I'll take that information and then I will go and find people who I think will do a good job with respect to that, given everything that I know about the company, the manager, the role, and the team, and then go to market and go find candidates who I think fit that. And so obviously that doesn't scale. Having senior people be recruiters doesn't scale. But in doing that a few times, you start to develop patterns. You start to understand, okay, here is actually what, if you think about like auto encoding, right? You are abstracting the relevant parts into some like finite, smaller dimension. You can think of it that way where, okay, I understand roles now from this more abstract representation that isn't the job description or a skill set, but it's some smaller dimensional space. And I understand candidates through that smaller dimensional space. Now I can put them in the same plane. I can put them in the same dimensions and start to match. So the goal is to be able to do that at scale, but it starts by just understanding the problem very deeply.
So an example would be if I wanted to become like a really good sports bettor and I wanted to focus on football, I'd probably start by just making predictions based on what I thought was interesting. I'd sort of look at things and do some analysis, and that would lead me down a further path of saying, oh, maybe this feature is relevant. And you start testing it and start building a model and infrastructure around it until you eventually have a more complete model infrastructure. I read the Billy Walters book recently, and it seemed like that was sort of progression he took, is that first he was just betting all the time, right? And learning the system that way. And then he realized that you could refine it. And he actually worked with another group that was very quantitatively inclined, but there's this sort of progression of you have to understand the domain from a hands-on grassroots level to be able to understand where to push and where to question and where to prod and where to figure out what's important. So I really like that idea. I'm not envious of you having to do all that intermediary work, but I think it's a very important.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
That you're trying to solve.
I'm excited. I love it. I mean, that's still how I build models. Is the first thing I always do is I just dive into the head of the person who understands the space the best and understand how they make decisions. And those are the features I generate. It's the same thing. If I can build a mental model first, machine learning modeling is so much easier because I have, like we talked about before, that initial baseline to work off of. And if I have a heuristic, now it becomes much easier to expand on that.
I love it. Well, I will make sure to leave all the info on how to contact you if people are interested in talking to you more about this. I think that's a very important thing. Before we go, I do have one question. You were talking about diving into the people's heads about how they make decisions. Something that I want to dive into your head a little bit about is that during our work at GoHealth, you actually went back and started to pursue your PhD in computer science. And from my view, that was like a total masochistic decision. But I'm interested in that process and the journey, and that's maybe a fun little way to end.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. It's funny because it seem like so long ago that like that time, and I'm still in it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So, well, I'll give you all of the detail. Well, not all the details. I'll give it to you straight. So when I was, what was I, 27 at the time, and I had just started in data science and machine learning. Back then, machine learning and data science was still new enough that it was like most people who did it were like PhDs who was still sort of considered like a research area. So at the time, it was like if you wanted to go into advanced machine learning, you typically needed to have research experience because that was the role was a research role. That is obviously no longer the case. That being said, at the time, I wasn't even sure that's what I wanted to do. But what I didn't want to have happen in my career was that I felt held back by not having something. And I thought that, if this is going to take 5, 6 years to do, I don't know if I'll have the energy or enthusiasm for it 5, 6 years from now and have to go back and do it. So I might as well do it now. The other part, which is I'm not that proud of, is there was definitely some sort of like ego aspect to it where it was like I had some sort of complex where I didn't feel good enough because I didn't have a PhD. My brother has a PhD and I've always been competitive with him. And there was definitely some aspect to that, which I'm not proud of, but like I would be lying to say that that was not part of the decision. Um, that being said, I'm also someone who, when I start something, like I will finish it no matter what. Like I just failure is not an option. So when I started it, I did set out to finish it, and I still am. And in fact, I'm planning on defending my thesis, my dissertation, in I think maybe 6 weeks. The second week of December, I think, is when we're scheduling it. So still living with that decision. I don't regret it, but I highly, highly do not recommend that anyone ever do that because it was, my 27 to 29 was living on my computer. And it was, I used to, at Gohealth, I used to Uber to and from class in the middle of the day. And like dealing with that was very exhausting. I learned a lot. But also like, a lot of people will ask me about PhDs actually once they realize that I'm doing it. And they're always like, well, I really want to be like an expert. I want to deep dive into this thing. And I'm like, if you want to be an expert or you want to deep dive into something, the worst thing you can do is try to do a PhD in it. The reason for that is because when you do a PhD, you don't have just unlimited constraints to choose whatever you want to do. You have to align what you are doing with your advisor, with where research funding is, and you have to align it in a way where it's like you have to please the research community, which is not necessarily like always the most productive thing to actually break ground. You think about like OpenAI and stuff like that. Like they're crunching, like they're in the grind. They're not just like casually writing research papers, and that's a lot of what academia is. Oh, casually is being a little bit pessimistic, but like if you want to be an expert in something, go do it. A PhD is not going to help you. Like you just need to like be very determined and go do it, and that is like find another motivation other than that because a PhD comes with a lot of overhead. So I will say that I'm happy I did it. It's my Mount Everest. It's my accomplishment that I was hopefully, assuming everything goes well, able to complete it while still working full time, which everyone said I could not do and would never be able to do. And I said, nah, I'm going to go do it. And I'm very proud of myself for sticking through it. That being said, the marginal value that it is providing me is relatively slim. And so if, for other people, I don't recommend doing it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I think if you spent all that same amount of time and just wrote a book on whatever you were completely immersed in that you wanted to spend that much time on, it probably would have served you better in terms of the learning as well as the notoriety and being an area expert. Research is very similar in the sense that you're publishing things, but a book is like another category all in of itself. I also think the ego thing was a very interesting one. I mean, I've been reading a lot about, athletes. I've been listening to that Founders podcast about some of the greatest, inventors or entrepreneurs of all time. I think, although you might view it as something you're not proud of, I think our ego, or maybe some of like the darker forces, our disappointment with ourself or our insecurities, are one of the most powerful motivating factors that are out there. And to me, it's almost a shame that we would waste that energy. I mean, like, if you're gonna feel these things, you might as well pivot them into progress or something valuable in your own life. And I firmly believe, like, I love David Goggins. He is the number one advocate of this. Is essentially all of the bad stuff that's happened to him, or the insecurities or any of the things that he feels, he pushes that into his motivation or his drive for motivating others, you know, doing unbelievable physical feats. And I don't know, I think that that's almost a superpower that you can have, is if you can motivate yourself in that sense. That's a gear that maybe some other people don't have. I mean, as weird as this sounds, the more content that I've gotten and self-assured in these types of things that I've been, the less motivated I've been.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't love that of myself. I like being motivated. I like it when I have to prove someone wrong, or I have to, go out of my way to start something new to prove to other people that I'm good enough in some sense. And it's nice to be able to have that additional fuel reserve to tap into. Will it make you happier necessarily? I don't know, but I still think it is a very powerful force in our life. I mean, think about all the crazy crap people have done out of ego or fear, like incredible things, also sometimes terrible things, but they still did stuff, which I think is something I would like to do in my life.
I'm totally with you. And actually, it's been that realization has sort of come to fruition with me in the last year, where I don't know if it's a change in me or a change in the way people perceive me, but it started to shift from being like, oh, this is a problem I have, to, oh, this is a differentiator I have. My wife will complain, I don't take any days off. Like, when I wake up in the morning, I do some work because that's my focus time. And I have a really hard time even like on vacation or on our honeymoon. That was very difficult for me to just like not get to my computer and like check in on stuff and work on stuff, because I'm so energized and motivated to do that. And for so long, it's been like, oh, this is a problem I need to manage. And like, I need to be able to like let go of it. And I still think it's true. I'm not trying to advocate for working on weekends. I definitely don't recommend that to people, but I do I have started to realize that energy, it can be leveraged as a differentiator, and it's made me more comfortable with like how I am. And that feels good, right? That like, it makes me happy to feel like comfortable in my own skin there. Because I think, when you think about like, why do businesses or people succeed, a lot of them is because there's like a little piece of them that's broken, and they're trying to, overcompensate for that. And that like motivation 100%. Is just, their motivation is so much stronger than anything else, than somebody who's not a little broken will ever experience. So I liked, it's not a superpower, but it has become, I've started to embrace it more so lately.
I like how you're now sitting in the dark and we're talking about embracing the dark side.
No, I look like a weirdo here.
Very symbolic.
All my lights. It was totally bright out when we started, and now I'm just like sitting in this dark room talking about
the problem with my time zone when we do interviews. So Jack, I mean, those are all the questions we had. You have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, and any way that people can learn more or communicate with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to communicate with me or learn more, just follow me on LinkedIn. That's really all I'm doing right now in terms of like sending my message out there. But you'll start to see more of that once I finish up here at Phi. Once my baby's born and I'm up late at nights, I'll probably just start typing up stuff on LinkedIn, maybe even more frequently. But I think the message I want to communicate to people is, I think we are in need as an industry to kind of like break the restraints that we've had or the mold that we've had around who is successful and completely reshape them. Because I think that the best people understand that that is not what is commonly believed. And I think we are not helping ourselves as an industry by pretending that that doesn't exist or that that's not true. I think that, so many people are probably feeling right now they're struggling to find a job, they're struggling to get where they want to be. And I don't think that needs to be the case. So I want to encourage people to start thinking about things in a new manner. Whether or not you agree with me doesn't matter, but just, keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think that if you want to make a difference in a space, you have to be willing to propose change that not everyone will necessarily agree with. And I think that that's a pretty important thing. I think the people that have made the largest difference in almost every domain are the people that went against maybe more conventional wisdom. And I kind of hate conventional wisdom as I've learned more, because there is no such thing as convention, whether it's how to get into this domain, whether it's what the nature of the work is, whether it's what success means. And so I think that, I'm really aligned with a lot of things you're saying, and I'm excited to be able to share this conversation with the community.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken.